Okay, so with that, we'll get started. Thank you for joining today's presentation on commitment transparency. My name is Kristen Ta. I'm a senior advisor in the Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration, and I'll be your moderator for the next 45 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and introduce my other presenter, Michelle Bowles, and we'll go ahead and get started. Today's format will include a short presentation, followed by Q&A with Michelle and I. During the presentation, we have Q&A staff to answer questions in the Q&A box. So let's get started. Michelle?
Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Bowles. I serve as the Director of the Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration. Happy to be here with you guys today to go over commitment transparency and to try to answer any additional questions that you guys may have. As a part of the overview, we're going to talk to you a bit about the background and why we're focused so much on commitment transparency and disclosures, as well as talk to you all about required disclosures, what that looks like, both from the activity to the requirement for where we want the information disclosed, as well as going through an overview of your form updates, given the Biosketch and the other support, and then again, FAQs, and then providing you with some resources. So a bit about the background. As you all know, commitment transparency is a longstanding policy requirement for all of our applicants and recipients to report all, and we do mean all, research activities, both domestic and foreign. And I guess the question is, why is there such a focus on this, or why does this need to be reiterated in this requirement? And a lot of it is because we have failure by some of our researchers to disclose openly the substantial activities that they're involved in, which may alter decisions that NIH uses to fund and or support researchers and compromises our peer review integrity. Next slide. So the interagency areas of focus is NIH has identified several key issues and challenges that are not new, but very clear that some foreign governments and entities have devised a plan to outright steal, in some cases, U.S. research technology by not disclosing conflicts of interest, conflicts of commitment, nor offer information about their participation in talent recruitment programs. Next slide. So the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, Section 223, requires disclosure of funding sources and applications for federal research and development awards. And this has been an extremely helpful piece of legislation and text here, because we, within NIH and across the federal research platform under OSTP, and NSTC have developed interagency working groups where we are working together to implement NDAA 223. And NIH, as a result, prior to the finalization of NDAA 223, we've actually modified our forms and instructions that literally embody the principles that are outlined in these requirements. We are looking at disclosing activities in the Biosketch, pending and completed support, which we call other support, and then also certifying that the information is accurate, current, and complete, and that the updates that NIH is requesting, we can request that at any time during the award, or once it's known immediately, or within 30 days after it's known. NSPM 33 is also designed to safeguard the integrity of our research and development enterprise. We are looking at how this is being implemented again within our interagency working group, which is chaired by NIH, OSTP, and NSF. And what we are doing is developing a harmonized approach to looking at collection points for the other support forms, for Biosketch, as well as looking at how we are addressing non-compliance in the terms and conditions of the award. Next slide. So in the Biosketch, we capture appointments and affiliations. Of course, other support, we've modified that to make sure that we are collecting direct and indirect support, including current and pending and private and public sources of funding or income, both domestic and foreign. We are also looking at participation in foreign talent programs and looking at the Biosketch of positions and appointments, whether domestic or foreign, and making sure that those are harmonized across the federal research platform. So we have required disclosures. And so we have some considerations for our recipients. If we can get down to that slide, we can talk about what that looks like. Where are we, Kristen? Because
hang on, you skipped ahead on me. I can get there.
Okay. All right. So we have the required disclosures. And so the considerations for recipients, we have developed a preamble just for an opportunity for us to kind of outline for our applicants and recipients what the framework is by which we are looking to have disclosures made. We are looking definitely at the fact that if it's going to cause a compliance risk for the recipient institution, we need to consider and identify relationships and existing relationships and potential relationships that would impact the research integrity. We also look at Fcoi, and we look at Fcoi in light of other support, which we had not necessarily done in the past, but are definitely doing that and combining and harmonizing and looking at that from a broad stroke and a very clear perspective for overlap and for making sure that those financial conflict of interest are disclosed when it's going to impact that research integrity. And then, of course, for overlap, it's scientific, budgetary, and commitment overlap, which is a longstanding requirement. And those have been the focus areas. And then the question there then becomes, if there are answers that we say yes to any of the three potential considerations for our recipients or our applicants, we want to have them reported. That's the standard. And when in doubt, we always tell the recipients, reach out and ask early and often and report as needed on a consistent basis. So for NIH disclosure requirements, we have several areas within our interagency working group that we've identified. And we've tried to make it very simplistic and very digestible for our applicants and our recipients, as well as for our internal stakeholders, which are our program officials and our grants management officials. And the goal there really is to try to make sure that we're clear on where the disclosure requirements are and what kinds of activities invoke those disclosure requirements. So the type of activity is outlined on the left. And then what we say here is that we have 3 different or 4 different columns, and we'll go through each one. The Biosketch and what's required for reporting. Other support, which for NIH is just in time. The annual RPPR is another collection point for disclosure. And then post-award information, terms and conditions is when you find out about it, disclose it as soon as you know about it, or at least within 30 days of the information being disclosed. So for the types of activities here for Biosketch, where the organization affiliations, appointments, educational information is disclosed in the Biosketch, this is where we want to see the information collected. Professional preparation, educational degrees, we collect that in the Biosketch. Organizational affiliations and appointments is collected in the Biosketch. And then, of course, the academic professional institution appointments, whether or not remuneration is received or whether it's full-time, part-time, or voluntary. That is all collected under the Biosketch. And this is all helpful information for us to share with you guys. Next slide, Kristen. So what do we collect under current and pending projects from all sources, and complete support is not required. So here we go. For projects that are currently under consideration from whatever source, ongoing projects, irrespective of whether that support is provided through a proposing organization, another organization, or directly to the individual, and regardless of whether or not there's money value engaged here, even if the support is received as in kind, such as laboratory space, office space, equipment, supplies, or employees, that is required at just in time or at the time of the RPPR or as soon as the recipient knows about it and it's under the other support collection. Next slide. For in-kind contributions not intended for use on the project or proposal being proposed, is collected at just in time, at the RPPR, or as soon as the recipient or the individual knows about it within the 30 days. And that is within the other support. For any in-kind contributions that is intended for use on the project being proposed to NIH, it must be included as the facilities and other support equipment section. And we've outlined that in our FAQs because we've received several questions about that over the time span. Next slide. NIH's disclosure requirement for visiting scholars in labs and funded by an external entity, or students and postdoctoral researchers funded by an external entity. So we'll go back up here for other support. For the visiting scholars in lab funded by an external entity, it's other support or at the time that it's known about it. For students and postdoctors funded by an external entity, it's required at just in time, at the RPPR, or as soon as it's known about. For consulting, which has been a question that has come up several times, even internally, to be quite honest with you. Consulting that falls outside of an individual's appointment, which is separate from the institution's employment agreement, is collected at just in time, at the RPPR, or as soon as it's known about, or within the 30 days that we talked about before. And of course, that's other support. Travel supported and paid by an external entity to perform research activities with an associated time commitment is required in the other support at just in time, at the RPPR, or as soon as it's known about it. But the key here really is that it involves research and falls outside of an individual's appointment. And what we want to make sure of is that individuals that, we've had, again, a lot of questions as it relates to this. And we want to make sure that we have a broad stroke. We want to make sure that consultant, of course, is permitted by the individual's appointment. But agencies and research organizations should ensure that our researchers do not inappropriately characterize research activities as consulting. Authorship or co-authorship or scientific or technical published papers or posted preprints would be one manifestation of an activity that involves research, and it should be reported. And so we want to make sure that, again, if in question or if there's a doubt, please reach out and ask early and often so that we can provide you with the necessary requirements and information so that you can disclose appropriately. Next slide. So the certification of the individual that the information is disclosed is accurate, current, complete, and which is the signature of the researcher, is definitely required at the other support and at the RPPR. And we would think if there were changes and we needed to update it, it would be as soon as available. But we also want to highlight the fact that at some point there will be a requirement, the same requirement for the Biosketch, because we want to make sure that everyone is clear on the fact that any information shared within the Biosketch must be accurate, complete, current, and completed. And it also aligns with Ndaa 223. So I just want to make sure that folks are very clear that we will be collecting that information at the Biosketch also, and working with Science CV to actively make that happen. And then, of course, supporting documentation. NIH does require that the recipients provide translated contracts, grants, and other agreements where there it is not in English, and there's a foreign involvement there. Next slide. So, of course, another collection point is significant financial interest. And that is not disclosed nor required in the other support section, but continues to be disclosed and made available in the financial conflict of interest module. That policy has not changed. We've received several and numerous questions about that, and Fcoi is still reported in the Fcoi module, and the NIH grants policy statement that's outlined in the slide continues to apply. What other support does not include is training awards, prizes, and gifts. And we have, of course, the definition of gift, where there is no expectation of anything. If it's a gift, it doesn't need to be reported. Startup support provided to the individual by the applicant organization does not need to be reported. And anything that is truly consulting activities where the PI or other researchers, key senior personnel, is not conducting research, again, example given, no authorship or co-authorship of publications is anticipated from the activity, that is not reported as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen so that she can go through the forms and the forms instruction updates.
Great. So now that we know all about exactly what needs to go on the form, I'm just going to talk a bit about the updates we made to the forms and instructions to go along with all of those disclosures. So the updates to our forms and instructions were outlined in 2 guide notices that were issued earlier this year. And they're currently posted on our Biosketch and other support pages on our OER website. And just to clarify for everybody, the updated forms and instructions are required for use on all applications, RPPRs, just in time, any submission that's happening on or after January 5th, 2022. So that's the date at which we'll actually begin enforcing the use of these new forms. So to take a quick look at the Biosketch, you can see here on the right, the sample that we have for our updated Biosketch format. So section B, positions and honors, has been renamed positions, scientific appointments and honors. And here applicants and recipients need to list all of their current positions and scientific appointments, as Michelle outlined earlier. And I just wanted to point out the word current. So we're not asking for previous positions that have ended. No historical information is required. And one change that we did make to this format to align more with our Fed-wide research partners is that these positions need to be listed in reverse chronological order. If all of the required information is not included, then your Biosketch is incomplete. Also wanted to point out the change that was made to section D. Section D used to contain scholastic performance and research support, but it's been updated to just scholastic performance. The requirement for research support has been removed. So this section is now only required if you're using the fellowship Biosketch, and this situations when that applies are listed here on the slide. Along with that, I also wanted to emphasize that the 5-page limit for the Biosketch has not changed. That still remains in place. And you can see full samples of each the non-fellowship and fellowship Biosketches on our website. There are links on the slides. Now let's take a quick look at other support. So the other support form and instructions were updated to provide a clearer format and data elements and to align with those Fed-wide implementation efforts that Michelle was discussing earlier. In addition to the updates to the form itself, we also have the requirement for supporting documentation. So for all foreign appointments that are specific to that PDPI or senior key personnel and are listed on their other support, supporting documentation needs to be provided. That includes copies of the contract, grant, or any other written agreement specific to that appointment. And those documents need to be provided in English, so they need to be translated if they were not in English originally. We also have the requirement for immediate notification of undisclosed other support. So if after submitting your just-in-time or after submitting your RPPR, your organization becomes aware of something that should have been disclosed, you need to reach out to the grants management specialist named in your notice of award within 30 days of becoming aware of that, so that they can do an updated review of any potential overlap or issues. And then lastly, here we have the requirement for an electronic signature. As Michelle mentioned, the updated NDAA requires that individuals certify what they are submitting. And so we're capturing that via the electronic signature. And institutions can use the electronic signature program of their choice in accordance with their policies. But it's important that you maintain that documentation at the institution so that if NIH needs to come and ask questions about any signatures that were provided, you have the support to show that the person who signed it is actually the person who was supposed to be signing. And now I'm just going to run through some of our common FAQs, and then we'll take some questions from the Q&A box in the chat. So first, for Biosketch. Since research support is no longer in Section D, as I mentioned a second ago, is that information captured elsewhere? So applicants and recipients are now able to, in Section A, the personal statement, highlight ongoing and recently completed research support that they want to highlight to show their experience related to this application. So that information can be submitted in Section A. The Biosketch instructions also state that positions and scientific appointments must be provided. We've gotten a lot of questions about whether this refers to active position and appointments or all positions and appointments that someone has ever held. As I mentioned a couple minutes ago, the Biosketch requirement is only for all current positions and scientific appointments. So just to state again, you do not need to provide any historical information. A few more questions about Biosketch. Is the use of Science CV required? And the answer to that is no. We do have an updated Biosketch format available in Science CV, but it's not required at this time. We've also gotten frequent questions about the use of hyperlinks in the Biosketch. So we just wanted to clarify, hyperlinks are not permitted in the Biosketch and may not be used in citations. Applicants may provide a URL, the full URL, to a list of their published work, and this must point to a government website. We recommend MyBibliography. And then lastly, what does NIH consider to be a scientific appointment? So applicants and recipients need to determine what constitutes a scientific appointment in accordance with their institutional policies and procedures for tracking and managing outside activities. And so they should be reporting in Biosketches and other support in accordance with those institutional policies. Okay, so some questions about other support. The first one, and probably one of our most frequent questions, is does NIH require disclosure of recently completed support? No, NIH does not require disclosure of recently completed support. And our FAQs have been updated to reflect that along with the instructions. Another very common question is whether the forms impact the timing of submission. So as you know, other support is typically submitted at just in time or with your RPPR, and that is not changing. The updates we've made are just to the forms and instructions, not to the timing of the submission. And then lastly, regarding the electronic signatures, as I stated earlier, other support submissions must come in as a flattened PDF after all the signatures are obtained. And the recipients and applicants can use whichever electronic signature software their institution chooses to use in accordance with their policies. Simply typing a name is not an electronic signature, and that would not be acceptable. And again, as I mentioned before, the recipient and applicant institutions are expected to maintain the original electronic signature on their end so that if NIH ever needs to request that information, it can be made available. We also often get questions about domestic collaborations. So for example, I'm a key personnel on a grant in the US. I'm collaborating with another scientist in the US, and their experiments have benefited my research. So should that be reported as other support? And the answer is yes. Other support does include domestic research collaborations. However, we're not asking you to disclose every single phone call or email that you may have with a colleague about your research. Michelle mentioned earlier, and this is a good benchmark that we keep emphasizing over and over, and that is typically if the collaboration is something that's anticipated to result in co-authorship, that's an indication that it would be an endeavor that would need to be listed on your other support. And then for in-kind resources that do not have any associated effort, we've often been asked if researchers can enter 0 effort on their other support submission. So yes, you can put 0 effort for in-kind resources that don't have an associated time commitment. I do just want to point out, though, that you cannot enter 0 for both effort and the dollar value. So it does need to have either a dollar value or an effort level associated with it on the form. And so that's the last of the common questions that we had. I'm just going to show our resources screen and I'll turn to the Q&A so that we can answer some of your questions.
So I have answered some, Kristen, in the
Okay.
Chat, but there's also some new ones that have come in. I wanted to go back to Audrey's question where she says that we had skipped slide 10. That was the example where NIH we provided them with some samples of contracts that we've seen and the kinds of yeah.
This one is probably what you're looking for. Yeah. So yeah, this is a good example of one that we saw after the fact, where the individual had a contract stating that they would be working full-time at a foreign institution, while they were also said to be working full-time at a domestic institution where they had NIH grants. That was a case where we saw very significant overlap. And another big problem, which is part of the reason for implementing these disclosures more broadly Fed-wide, is because institutions have been often saying that they were not aware of these additional appointments and outside activities, which is part of the reason why we need more of this information submitted to us at NIH so that we can make sure we're aware and are making good funding decisions.
Yeah. I do say, though, that these are some of the cases that we've seen. I don't know that other agencies have seen them Fed-wide, but we have absolutely shared these cases and these kinds of examples, which has helped us make some really good sound decisions as it relates to, harmonization. Because one of the things we have heard is that the institutions are not aware. And we wanted to provide our institutions with enough support where they could collect those contracts and submit those to us so that we can actually look and help them make some of these determinations. So that's a part of why we are asking for the contracts to be submitted to us so that the recipients have it, we have it, we can translate it, they can translate it to us, and then we can translate what the overlap or the overcommitment looks like.
Okay. One question I see in here a few times is whether there will continue to be 2 versions of the other support form for use at just-in-time and the RPPR. The answer to that is no. There's now only one form to be used for both just-in-time and RPPR submissions. And we are actually updating our RPPR instructions to reflect that. So those updated instructions will be issued this fall. And then, Michelle, there are a couple folks asking if physical signatures are acceptable on other support.
So I did respond to that. That's a wet signature, and we're not accepting wet signatures.
And I see one question here about fellowship and training awards that I wanted to address because we actually recently updated our FAQ on that. The question is, do federal fellowships and training grant supported students and postdocs, such as F31, F32, T32, et cetera, that are performing research in support of an investigator need to be reported as in-kind support on the investigator's NIH other support documents. And so where we've landed with that is, if the PDPI or senior key personnel is putting measurable effort toward those projects, then it does need to be disclosed. But if they're simply serving as the mentor to those fellows and trainees, then that does not need to be listed on the other support.
So there was another question too. I think someone wanted to confirm whether or not we are accepting wet signatures, and the answer is no, we are not accepting wet signatures. So there are several questions in the chat, Kristen, if you can just go through.
Yeah. There's quite a few, 183. So there is
let's
one.
get through as many as we can.
Yep. So the FSEP 424 Guide for Mentors, Current and Pending Support limits the attachment to 3 pages. And I actually had left that one unanswered because I thought we had this slide in here about it, but I think we might have left it out. That is still going to be limited to 3 pages. And the reason for that is that the elements actually required for that current and pending support submitted by mentors, those key elements are not changing. You're still not required to provide every single item listed on the other support form. So that's the reason that the page limit is not changing. The instructions for that current and pending support will be remaining mostly the same. The only key change will be the shift from direct costs to total costs to align with how we're providing information across the board. And then, is there a concern with using both the new and old format of biosketches and proposals prior to January 25th? So this could likely occur when there are multiple participating institutions. We're hearing that some reviewers are negatively commenting when mixed formats are used. So currently, because both formats are allowed through January 25th, it is acceptable to have both formats in an application until the requirement goes into place for the new form to be used.
So Kristen,
and
it
I
looks
just
like
want
there's some, yeah, it looks like there's some
it looks like
questions
folks
in the
are entering
chat
questions
and in the Q&As. I don't know how we're going to keep up with both. I mean, I can try to go through the chat and respond to some as well as help you answer these, but if you could put them all in the Q&A, that would be great. Put them in
the Q&A because I think then we can also get written responses after the fact.
Yep, perfect.
That's probably the better place to put them. Michelle, there's one here. Can you clarify when translated agreements and contracts are required? So when that supporting documentation is required? Do you want to maybe talk
at the time? Yeah, it's required when you submit the either just in time and it's included, or at the time of the RPPR. Whenever you are submitting the other support information, it needs to be included.
Mm-hmm. And then the next question, and I'm just going to hop to the other support mock-up for this one, is the direct and indirect for the current year or the whole amount of the grant? So the total award amount, including indirect costs, is total. So the entire competitive segment, direct and indirect. And then are translated copies only required if it is reported on the other support document? What if the PI has a foreign position, but it does not appear on their other support document? In that case, would NIH still require a translated copy of the agreement for that foreign position?
What we require is if there is a foreign talent program or a foreign agreement that is included in the other support and it's not in English, it needs to be translated. If it's not if it's not included in other support, then obviously we don't need it. But anything that's reported and disclosed that is not in English needs to be translated.
Yeah. Okay, considering other support for pending or pending participation in, what is the correct interpretation? Is it pending funding or pending review? So for your other support submission, pending is a project or proposal that where the application or proposal has been submitted but has not yet been funded. So
And that hasn't changed.
It's the same as it has always been. Here's a good one for you, Michelle. Do you anticipate any changes to the regulations for Fcoi related to conflicts of commitment?
No, not at this time. I think what we're trying to do, conflicts of commitment, is still, again, being captured in other support. Significant financial interests are captured at the Fcoi and within the Fcoi module. And I know that some agencies in our harmonization efforts do plan to include commitments in their Fcoi collections. NIH is not one of them, but of course, we would be open to that if HHS decides to open the regs, because we are subject to the HHS Fcoi regulation. It's not just for NIH, but all HHS operating divisions under the department.
Great. And there's another question here about required disclosures. Is an honoraria for something like a virtual research talk at a foreign institute, does that need to be included in other support? So the answer to that,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say the answer is no.
No, right.
Honoraria does not require disclosure.
And we actually put that in, that's in the policy statement as well. So if you're in the chat, it says, it sounds like a lot of us have questions that are not being read, and they want to know if we're going to respond. So 222 questions in 20 minutes. I'm not sure we're going to be responding to all of them. And what we do suggest, though, we'll try to respond or point you to the FAQ because there are some FAQs. But we're looking at the questions and the answers, which Kristen outlined in the beginning of the presentation and not in the chat. So Kristen, if we can plow through a few more of these.
Yeah, we've got 5 minutes, so we'll get through what we can. Our investigators have research funding for specific projects, but they do not have salary support or effort on them, non-federal. We've had a few grants management specialists tell us that the other support is wrong because the individual must have effort. And if they don't, we should remove it from other support. If there's no effort on a project, should we put it in the in-kind section? So you can list projects and proposals that have zero effort, and you can include zero effort if that is truly the correct effort level. We did recently just do an internal training for our staff on other support. So that's something we can also clarify internally so that folks understand what they're expecting to see on the other support submissions.
And I think the question is valid, right? Because if there's no effort, then why would it be included, right? And so I think we do need to look at that, Kristen.
Okay. Here's one we've gotten a few times internally. What does falls outside of an individual's appointment mean?
Falls outside of an individual's employment appointment is whatever is characterized at the institution's at the institutional level, whatever is in your employment contract with the institution. Your appointment is defined at the institution and not through NIH. So if consulting is something that your institution allows and there's no requirements for preprints and that kind of thing, then that's something that the institution would require. However, NIH has stated that if it does include preprints and scientific journals and that kind of thing, we would want to know about it. So we're in conflict with your institution is if it results in research, and that's the thing that we want to make sure of. We don't believe that that is the case, but we do know that there have been questions about it. So we aligned ourselves with NSF to make sure that we answered that question, that whatever that employer-employee relationship contract looks like, we want to support the institution. But where they differ, we want to make sure that we outline those differences and tell you what would invoke disclosure, and any research activity would invoke disclosure regardless of what the employee-employer relationship in the contract and the appointment looks like.
Okay. We also have a question about just in time. So sometimes the request for just in time is due within a very short window. After January 2022, will administrators be given more time to submit just in time since other support pages are more in-depth and require a signature? So this isn't something that we've planned to do at this point. Currently, the just-in-time window will probably remain about the same as it's been in the past.
Yeah, I think what we've tried to do over the course of the last year and a half is to outline, and we've been sharing the additional information collection points with the recipient community. And so I think in terms of obtaining a digital signature, the PIs and the researchers submit the other support through the AORs. It should come in with that signature. And so I'm not sure that that's an additional time. If there's some sort of nuanced, individualized challenge that you're having, of course, we will encourage our ICs to consider that. But pretty much everything that is outlined in your other support forms has been shared over the last year and a half, and you guys should be able to provide that to us timely.
Okay, here's another question that I've seen in the Q&A a few times. So if we were awarded an amount and then there were subcontracts, do we enter the amount of the total grant since it was all awarded to us, or just the amount staying at our institution, i.e. minus the subcontracts? So as the instructions outline, the total award amount, indirect and direct, must be reported. So if you are the prime recipient of that award, you need to report on the full award amount. If you're an individual submitting other support who is the PI on a subaward, only the subaward amount that PI has needs to be included on the other support.
But that would be submitted to the prime, and the prime still reports on the total.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key. It's whatever is at the prime, including the sub.
Correct. I also see some folks asking if the samples are online. Yes, the samples that we had in the slide today are already available online, so you can find those on our pages in the resource slides. And with that, unfortunately, I think we are out of time, but we will take these questions back and see if we can post written responses for the ones that we have here most commonly.
Someone asked about whether or not we have some sort of help desk, or they were trying to reach the help desk. So Kristen, if we could provide them with the email address where those questions need to be submitted and where our the staff is monitoring and responding, that would be helpful.
Yes, we do have a central mailbox for all of our Biosketch and other support questions, and that is NIHOS Biosketch at nih.gov. And we do our best to answer those questions as quickly as possible.
And I will say that if there are some questions in here and you haven't taken a look at our FAQ website, I do encourage you to do so, because there may be some responses there that are helpful, and then you might have some spin-off questions. But like Kristen said, we'll try to get through all of these, make sure that we address them, and where we have addressed them in our FAQs, we'll point you to the right place so that you have them. And thank you for attending the session, and thank you for all of your thoughtful questions.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Please take a moment to let us know what you thought by clicking on the session feedback form. It's located with the description and presenters on the auditorium list of sessions. And when you're completely done with the seminar, please complete the overall survey form in the navigation bar at the top of the page. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.